Hello everyone and welcome back to Panik Peak. Let me know where you are listening from in the world by leaving a comment, and if you like the episode, please like and subscribe. Now, let's get cozy, and let's begin. I had always thought of myself as careful, cautious. I knew the risks of an affair with a married man, especially one as wealthy and powerful as Henry. But the thrill of sneaking around, the stolen moments, the secret smiles, it was intoxicating. I told myself it would never get out of hand. That I was in control. But something began to shift. Slowly, at first, like a shadow creeping over me, but undeniable. A strange sensation that no matter where I went, I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, it was something more. Something I couldn't explain. I had been seeing Henry in secret for months. His mansion was a world all its own, a place where no one would find us. The gates were tall, the walls imposing, and the rooms, opulent and grand, were isolated from the rest of the world. It was supposed to be a place where we could escape, where we could be alone. But tonight, as I walked through those grand doors, something felt wrong. His absence was immediate, like a ghost had taken his place. I was alone in a house that had always felt like a safe haven. Except, it wasn't. It had always been Henry and I against the world, as we had convinced ourselves. And though I knew there were risks, his wife, the lies, the secrets, I never imagined how close those dangers could come. That tonight, the walls of his mansion would reveal the truth. I stepped cautiously inside, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the echo of my footsteps unnerving in the silence. The air was heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. I called out to him. "Henry." My voice was tentative, unsure. There was no response. I hesitated, turning around to glance behind me, half expecting to see his familiar form emerging from the shadows. But there was nothing. The front door shut with a finality that I hadn't noticed before, as though the house itself had locked me in. With a sense of unease growing in my chest, I took a few more steps into the grand hallway. The ornate chandelier above flickered slightly, casting strange, distorted shadows on the walls. I moved toward the library, his favorite place. A haven of leather-bound books and dark wood, where I'd often find him waiting for me with a glass of wine in his hand. I could already picture him there, reclining in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. But when I reached the door, the room was far too quiet. I couldn't hear the low hum of the fire in the hearth or the soft rustle of a page turning. Something was wrong. The door to the library was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with a faint creak, stepping inside. That's when I saw her. Margaret. She sat in Henry's chair, her fingers delicately tracing the edge of an old, tattered journal. The room seemed to grow even colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. She didn't look up immediately, her focus fixed on the pages before her. I wanted to turn and leave, but my feet wouldn't move. My heart pounded loudly in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. "Margaret." My voice trembled, the words barely more than a whisper. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were dark, unsettlingly calm. There was no surprise, no anger, just a quiet knowing. "You're late," she said, her voice unnervingly soft. "I've been waiting for you." My breath caught. I hadn't expected this. Henry's wife, the woman I had spent so much time trying to avoid, had been waiting for me. She had known all along. The journal she had been holding was ancient, its pages yellowed and worn, as though it had been handled countless times. She set it down slowly, her gaze never leaving me. I know everything, she continued, her voice like a soft, cruel melody. Every meeting. Every secret. Every lie you've told to my husband. I've been watching. Always watching. I froze. My blood ran cold. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be oblivious, tucked away in her own world, far from the life we were building in the shadows. I was supposed to be safe here, in this house, in Henry's arms. But now, Margaret stood before me, calm and composed, her eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and in that moment, I realized that I had made a fatal mistake. What? What are you talking about? I stammered, the words coming out in a disjointed rush. My body was trembling, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of which made sense. She stood up slowly, gracefully, as if every movement was calculated. Her presence filled the room, pushing me back with an invisible force. I know you think you're clever. That you've been sneaking around behind my back, she said, her voice chillingly calm. But I've been here the whole time, watching you. Watching both of you. I took a step back, my legs weak beneath me. Wait, you've been here. But how? She laughed softly, a low, hollow sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I never left. Not really. You see, this house has always been mine. I've been living in its shadows, behind its walls, in places you'll never find. My heart raced as she gestured to the room around us. The once familiar surroundings now felt alien, menacing. The walls seemed to breathe, the shadows twisting in ways that made me dizzy. You've always been so convinced of your own cleverness, haven't you? She said, her voice now dripping with malice. But this house has ears. It listens. And it has been waiting for you. I turned quickly, desperate to run, but the moment my foot moved toward the door, I heard it, the faintest creak of something moving in the walls. My breath caught in my throat. The sound was subtle, but unmistakable. I wasn't alone. The walls were closing in on me. Henry isn't here, she continued, her tone mocking now. He's never been here when you think he is. He never even noticed. But I did. I always did. I turned to face her, panic rising in my chest. Where is he? What have you done to him? Margaret smiled, her eyes gleaming with something dark and unholy. Oh, he's right here. She raised her hand, and for a moment, I thought she meant to strike me. Instead, she pointed to the walls. The whispering began then. Soft at first, like a murmur in the distance, but soon it grew louder. A voice. A voice I recognized. Henry's voice. Henry. I gasped, my legs shaking beneath me as I stepped backward. Shoo! Margaret's smile deepened, her eyes glinting with dark amusement. Listen closely. The house never forgets. And neither do I. Suddenly, the walls began to shift, the old mansion groaning in protest as if the very foundation were alive, breathing. The air thickened, oppressive and stifling, like being trapped inside a living nightmare. I reached out, my hand brushing the door, but it slammed shut on its own, trapping me in the room with her. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The whispering was growing louder now, more urgent, until it was no longer just Henry's voice. It was everywhere. The walls had ears. And they were listening. You were never the first, Margaret whispered, stepping closer to me. You were just the next one to fall into my trap. In that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't the one who had been watching. I was the one being watched. And there was no escaping the house. It had claimed me. It had claimed us all. The whispers intensified, each word laced with a mocking, suffocating tone. They twisted together, blending into a single, cacophonous voice that filled the room, crawling under my skin. I tried to pull away, but the walls seemed to close in, their cold embrace tightening around me. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I could feel the air growing thick, harder to breathe with each passing second. Margaret's figure loomed before me, her eyes glittering in the dim light as if she knew every secret, every hidden thought that I had buried deep inside me. "You thought you were the one in control," she said softly, her voice almost kind in its cruelty. "But you were never the one making the choices. The house was." I stumbled backward, my mind racing, searching for any escape, but the shadows twisted around me like tendrils, pulling me deeper into their suffocating grip. The walls moved, I realized now, shifting, undulating as if the house itself had a life, a consciousness, and it was hungry. "Please, Margaret," I begged, my voice cracking, my knees giving way beneath me. "Please, let me go. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She took a slow step forward, her face twisting with something between amusement and disgust. "You think apologies will save you?" She shook her head, pitying me. "No, my dear. You should have stayed out of it. But now you belong to it, just like I do." Before I could speak, I felt the air around me shift, no longer thick, but somehow thinner, colder, as if the house had taken a breath, inhaling deeply before the inevitable exhale. The walls creaked louder, like the slow, deliberate crawl of something ancient, something vast. I turned back toward the door, desperate to escape, but it was no use. The mansion had closed around me. There would be no way out now. I could hear Henry's voice again, softer this time, coming from somewhere beyond the walls. "You were never meant to be here," it whispered. The realization hit me like a wave, crashing through the remnants of my frantic thoughts. I wasn't the first, I would never be the first star. I was just another name on the list of those who had walked into this house, thinking they could outrun its hunger, only to be consumed by its unseen presence. I glanced at Margaret one last time, her eyes now filled with a strange, resigned satisfaction. "You'll understand soon enough," she murmured, as the house swallowed me whole. The last thing I heard was the echo of the walls, whispering my name as they closed in around me. Only silence. I had become part of the house, lost to its unholy embrace, just another secret the walls would keep. It was supposed to be a night of reconciliation. After weeks of silence, after the shouting and the broken promises, he reached out to me. He begged me to come to his cabin, deep in the woods, to make things right. "I want to fix this," he wrote. His words were heavy with sincerity, or so I thought. But there's something about distance, about time spent apart, that twists the truth. I should have known it wasn't just the two of us anymore. I should have known when I saw the message, when the invitation seemed so urgent. But love makes you blind, and so, I drove. The cabin was far from civilization, isolated in the heart of a dense forest where the trees pressed in so tightly, it felt like the world had faded away. The closer I got, the more the feeling of unease grew. The air grew cooler, the roads narrower, until they were barely wide enough for the car. And with each passing mile, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that I was being pulled into something I didn't fully understand. But I shook it off. I couldn't be afraid of the unknown, not when he was there, waiting for me. When I arrived at the cabin, the first thing I noticed was the silence. There were no birds in the trees, no distant sounds of animals or the wind rustling the leaves. It was too still, like nature itself was holding its breath. I parked my car, the engine's hum fading into the oppressive quiet. The door of the cabin was open, just slightly, as though waiting for me to step inside. I hesitated. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself forward. He was inside. I couldn't back out now. I stepped over the threshold and into the dim interior, the smell of pine and damp wood thick in the air. It was darker than I expected, the walls shadowed in corners where the light from the few flickering candles didn't quite reach. But there he was, standing near the fireplace, looking the same as I remembered. His tall frame, the scruff of his beard, the familiar sadness in his eyes that had drawn me to him from the start. "Come in," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft. It didn't sound like him, not the him I knew, anyway. There was something strained in his tone, something tight, as if he were holding back. I stepped inside, my eyes still searching the room. The feeling of unease only deepened. It was too quiet. Too dark. My heart began to race as I glanced around for any sign of his wife. She hadn't been mentioned in his messages, and I hadn't expected her here. But something in the air made me uneasy, something was off. "Where's Rachel?" I asked, trying to steady my breath, but the words felt hollow, out of place in the stillness. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes darted to the corner of the room, to the door that led into a darker part of the cabin. And then he turned back to me, his face twisted with a look I couldn't read. "She's here. She's waiting for us," he said, his voice so distant now, as though his mind was elsewhere. A door creaked open in the back of the room, and I saw her, Rachel, standing in the shadowy hallway. At first, I didn't recognize her. The woman I had seen in pictures was warm, smiling, with a calm demeanor that seemed to match his. But this woman was different. Her posture was stiff, her face pale, and her eyes were wide, unblinking, as if she were staring at something far beyond the room. There was something otherworldly about her. "Rachel?" I called softly, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stepped into the room, her footsteps silent on the wooden floor. Her smile was too wide, too knowing, as if she knew something I didn't. "Join us," she said, her voice a low, almost melodic hum that sent a tremor through my spine. I forced myself to smile, but I felt a cold sweat break out along my neck. Something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew it. This wasn't a reconciliation. This wasn't going to end the way I thought. Suddenly, Rachel turned away, moving to the center of the room where a small altar had been set up. It hadn't been there when I first entered, at least, I didn't remember seeing it. The floor was covered in strange symbols, etched in what I could only assume was blood. The air felt thick, charged with an oppressive energy that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. "Come closer," Rachel said, gesturing toward the altar with a slow, deliberate motion. I took a step back. What is this? What the hell is going on? My voice was louder now, shaking with fear, but neither of them answered. Instead, my gaze shifted to the walls. The first drop of blood appeared, slow at first, sliding down the wooden surface like some grotesque stain. And then, more followed, a trickle, a flood. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The blood wasn't just leaking, it was alive. It pulsed, like veins running through the walls themselves. The air grew colder. I felt a sharp sting on my skin, like the very atmosphere was cutting into me. I gasped, clutching my arms to my chest, trying to warm myself, but it was no use. My breath came out in sharp, frozen clouds. And then, the chanting started. Rachel was whispering something, her voice rising and falling in an eerie, unnatural rhythm. The words were foreign, the language alien, as if it was drawn from the very depths of the earth, a language forgotten by time itself. And he stood by, motionless, his face locked in a rictus of something too distant to be called concern. "Stop it. Please, stop," I screamed, stumbling backward toward the door. But when I reached for the handle, it was locked. I pulled harder, but it wouldn't budge. The blood on the walls was rising, creeping up, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow thicker, darker, as if they were watching me, waiting. Rachel's voice reached a pitch so high, I felt it vibrating in my bones. The walls trembled, and then, with a sickening sound, the floor beneath me cracked open, revealing a gaping chasm of darkness, an abyss that seemed to pull at my very soul. "No. No, I won't," I started, but my words were cut off by a low growl, a sound so deep and rumbling that it seemed to come from the very earth itself. From the darkness below, something stirred, something ancient. I could feel it, a presence so heavy, so hungry, that it was suffocating. I staggered back, but my feet wouldn't obey. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by the sheer force of it. And then, he spoke. "You were invited," he whispered, his voice hollow, distant, like it was being pulled through time itself. "And now, you will be chosen." The air thickened, pressing against me, and the blood on the walls pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I could feel the darkness closing in, wrapping around me, squeezing out the last breath of light from the cabin. I was trapped. There was no escape. No way out. The shadows reached for me, long fingers of blackness that seemed to stretch out from the abyss, and I realized, with horror, that the invitation hadn't been for reconciliation. It had been a summons. And I was the sacrifice. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was her voice, sweet and cold. "Welcome." The next morning, when the sun rose over the forest, the cabin sat silent once more. The walls were pristine, untouched by blood or darkness. The air, once thick with malice, now seemed peaceful, serene. But inside, there was no trace of me. No sign I had ever been there. The only thing left was the faint, lingering echo of a chant, slowly fading away, as if it had never really ended. And the cabin waited, for the next invitation. I always knew I was a secret. From the stolen glances in dimly lit bars to the hushed conversations held behind closed doors, I was never meant to exist beyond the hours he gave me. But I could live with that, I could live in the shadows, as long as he still reached for me. What I didn't know was that being a secret could turn into something far worse. That I could become nothing at all. It started with the stares. Not from him, Daniel barely met my eyes anymore, but from her. His wife. She knew. I saw it in the way she lingered near me at the cafe, her fingers pressing against the glass display case as if she were absorbing something from the pastries inside. The way she walked too close behind me at the grocery store, her breath almost touching my neck. I even saw her one night outside my apartment building, standing beneath the street lamp with her head tilted at an unnatural angle. At first, I told myself it was paranoia. I was the guilty one. Maybe my nerves were getting the best of me. Then came the forgetting. It started small. My usual barista, the one who knew my name and order by heart, stared at me blankly and asked, "Have we met?" My co-workers gave me polite but distant looks, as if I were a temp who had just arrived. My mother didn't return my calls. And then, one night, I couldn't find myself in the mirror. I stood in front of it, under the harsh fluorescent glow of my bathroom lights, my breath shallow. My reflection was gone. The room was there, the sink, the shower, the tile floor. But not me. I laughed at first, because what else could I do? I waved my hand in front of the glass, expecting it to be some kind of weird trick of the light. My fingers trembled as I lifted my phone to take a picture. The screen showed an empty room. Something was wrong. I pulled out my shoebox of old photographs, rifling through them with shaking hands. One by one, I realized they were gone too. The ones of me, at least. My birthday party when I turned 10. I wasn't in the frame. My graduation picture. Just my classmates, standing awkwardly on the school steps. The picture of Daniel and me in the hotel bed, the one I kept hidden at the bottom of the box. It was just him now. I called him immediately. "Something's happening to me," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, distant. "I think your wife." "My wife what?" he cut in, sighing. "Clara, we talked about this. She doesn't know." "She does," I hissed. "And I think she's doing something to me." He groaned. "You're being paranoid." I wanted to scream at him, shake him, make him see. But I could already feel something slipping, unraveling inside me. The whispers started a few nights later. I woke to a dry, rasping murmur filling my apartment, crawling under my skin like centipedes. The air was thick and wrong, like something heavy pressed against my chest. I sat up slowly. The room was dark, but a shape stood in the corner, a silhouette too still to be human. The whispers grew louder, though the figure didn't move. The words weren't English. They weren't in any language I knew, yet I understood them. They spoke of undoing. Of erasure. Of making things right. I tried to scream, but my throat filled with ice. Then the figure did move, stepping forward just enough for the moonlight to catch her face. Daniel's wife. Her eyes were black voids, her lips moving in that soundless chant. Her hands were outstretched, fingers curved like claws. She was pulling something from me. I felt it leave in a rush, a force I didn't know I had inside me. My breath hitched as I felt myself thinning, unraveling further. Then she smiled, and the world tilted. I woke up in the street. Barefoot. Freezing. I had no memory of how I got there. My keys and phone were missing. I ran back to my apartment, but my key wouldn't fit the lock. The name on the buzzer was different. My neighbor, Mrs. Patel, opened the door when I knocked, but her face twisted in confusion. "Can I help you?" "It's me," I said. "Clara. I live here." Her brows furrowed. "I'm sorry, dear. I don't know you." Panic clawed up my throat. I turned and ran. Daniel. He had to remember me. He had to. I pounded on his door until he answered, groggy and annoyed. "What the hell?" His eyes met mine, and I knew. He didn't recognize me. "Who are you?" he asked. The words hit me harder than any slap. I tried to push inside, but he blocked me. I don't know you." "Daniel, please," I begged. "It's me. It's Clara." I searched his face for some flicker of recognition, some sign that I existed. But there was nothing. He didn't know me. No one did. I turned, shaking, tears burning in my eyes. And then I saw her. Standing across the street, in the golden glow of the porch light. Smiling. And I knew in the deepest part of me, that I had lost. I was gone. I tried to scream, but the sound never left my lips. Then the world went dark. Daniel's wife stood in the doorway, watching her husband shake his head in confusion. "Who was that?" he muttered, rubbing his temple. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him, her smile widening. "No one," she murmured. And he nodded. Because to him, it was true. I am nowhere. I don't know where I am, or what I've become. There's no light, no sound, only the heavy weight of absence. I try to remember my own name, but it slips through my mind like water. I was once someone. Now, I am a whisper, an afterthought. A ghost of a secret that should never have been. I scream, but no one hears me. And somewhere, in the world I no longer belong to, she is still smiling. Because she won. And I am nothing at all. Love makes you blind. That's what they say, right? But they never tell you how love makes you foolish. How it warps your sense of danger, numbs the alarm bells screaming in your head, and lulls you into a false sense of security. I should have seen the warning signs. I should have known that a man who lies to his wife could just as easily lie to his mistress. But Jeremy made me feel special. Like I was the only real thing in his world. So when he promised he would leave her, when he whispered about a future where it was just the two of us, I believed him. And when he finally invited me to his house, saying, "Tonight's the night. She's gone. We'll pack your things together," I thought I had one. But love makes you blind. And sometimes, it leads you straight into the dark. When I arrived at Jeremy's house, the driveway was empty except for his car. The place looked normal, even cozy, the soft yellow glow of lights behind drawn curtains, the faint hum of a distant television. It felt domestic, safe. The front door was open. Just a crack. I frowned. Had he forgotten to close it? "Jeremy?" I called out, stepping inside. The air smelled different. Like burning herbs, something woody and pungent. Then I saw her. Olivia. She stood in the hallway, hands clasped neatly in front of her, a serene smile on her lips. "Welcome, dear," she said, her voice warm, almost affectionate. "We've been waiting for you." The words sent an immediate chill through me. She wasn't supposed to be here. Jeremy had told me she was gone. That it was over. So why was she standing there, smiling as if I was an old friend? "Jeremy?" I said again, my voice a little weaker this time. He stepped into view then, just behind her. His face was pale, drawn, his posture stiff. Something was wrong. I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood," I said quickly, glancing at the door. "I thought." "Nonsense," Olivia cut in smoothly, reaching for my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Tonight is a special night. We're celebrating you." "Celebrating me?" She nodded. "You're the guest of honor, after all." The dining room was beautiful. A long oak table stretched across the room, adorned with polished silverware, steaming platters of food, and flickering candles. The scent of roasted meat and dark red wine filled the air. It should have been comforting. But the moment I stepped inside, my stomach tightened. There were others here. Strangers. 6 of them, seated around the table. Their faces were unfamiliar, yet each one was watching me intently, their eyes bright, their smiles too wide. I glanced at Jeremy. His head was bowed, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles were white. My pulse quickened. "Please, sit," Olivia said, pulling out a chair. I hesitated. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. But I forced myself to smile, to keep my voice light. I really can't stay long. I just came to talk to Jeremy. Olivia let out a soft laugh. Oh, sweetheart. Don't be silly. You must be starving. Before I could protest, she placed a hand on my shoulder and guided me into the chair. The guests all lifted their glasses. To new beginnings, Olivia said. I hesitated. Jeremy looked at me then. His eyes held something raw, something desperate. A warning. Drink, Olivia urged, her voice soft but insistent. It's tradition. I swallowed hard and lifted the glass to my lips, pretending to take a sip. Warm. Heavy. Metallic. I set it down, my hands trembling. The guests began eating, their movements slow and deliberate. I forced myself to look at the food. Rich, dark meat sliced into perfect portions. A thick red sauce drizzled over the top. The aroma was strong, overwhelming. Too overwhelming. Then I saw it. A hand. Pale, glistening. Tucked between the roasted vegetables on one of the platters. The fingers curled inward, the nails still intact. I froze. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. No. No, no, no. I pushed my chair back. I have to go. Jeremy shot up from his seat, but Olivia's hand landed on his wrist, stopping him. Stay, she said, her voice soft. The guests had stopped eating. They were all looking at me. Please, I whispered, turning to Jeremy. Tell me this is some sick joke. His throat bobbed. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then Olivia leaned in close, her lips near my ear. You really are beautiful, she murmured. He has such good taste. The room tilted. The candlelight flickered. And then Olivia whispered, the perfect trap, don't you think? I ran. I didn't think, I just bolted, shoving my chair back so hard it toppled over. But before I could reach the door, arms grabbed me. Hands wrapped around my wrists, my waist, my throat. I screamed, kicked, clawed, but they were too strong. Jeremy. He was still at the table, frozen. He didn't move. He didn't help me. You brought her here, one of the guests said to him, almost pityingly. That was the deal. Jeremy's face crumpled. I'm sorry, he choked out. My blood ran cold. You knew, I whispered. You knew what this was. Tears welled in his eyes. They told me if I brought you, they'd let me go. Olivia sighed. Oh, Jeremy. You really are so weak. And then she nodded to the others. Prepare the altar. I fought harder, but it was useless. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the dining table being cleared. Plates and glasses pushed aside. The silk tablecloth peeled away, revealing what lay beneath. A slab of cold, stained stone. And then I understood. I wasn't the guest of honor. I was the offering. The dinner guests feasted well that night. And by morning, Jeremy was gone. Not free, never free. Just, gone. And Olivia? She set the table again, smoothing out a fresh white cloth, polishing the silverware. Then she sat back and waited. It was only a matter of time before Jeremy, or another fool just like him, found someone else. Someone young. Someone trusting. Someone foolish enough to believe in love. And when they did, the perfect trap would be set all over again. They say every house has its secrets, but some secrets are never meant to be uncovered. When desire turns to obsession, and love twists into something unrecognizable, the walls begin to whisper, and the shadows stretch long into the night. This is not just a story of betrayal, it is a warning. I should have known better. Affairs never end cleanly. But I thought if I ended it, if I walked away, I could salvage my life before it collapsed. I was wrong. So very wrong. The mansion looms around me, its walls pressing inward like a closing throat. The storm outside rattles the windows, but it's not the wind making the house groan. Something moves here, something unseen but always present. And then there's her. She hasn't spoken since I arrived, since I was lured here under the pretense of one final conversation with him. She simply watches. The wife. Her dark eyes are bottomless, her skin stretched too tight over her hollow face. She stands in the doorway, unblinking, as I stumble from room to room, searching for an exit that does not exist. The mansion feels like a living thing, breathing with a rhythm I can almost hear. The floors creak beneath my feet, the walls pulse in a slow, steady beat. It's as if the house is watching me, waiting for me to unravel. Each time I move, it shifts slightly, contorting and rearranging like a maze that constantly changes shape. My heart races as I realize that there is no escape. The walls are alive, and I am their prisoner. The first room I enter is a study, the air stale with the scent of aged books and dust. The desk is cluttered with photographs, of me and him. But they are wrong. They shift when I'm not looking, the faces distorting as if they have a mind of their own. His face twists into something monstrous, his eyes narrowing into predatory slits, his mouth pulling into a twisted grin. My own expression warps, contorting into a hollow scream, one that I never made. I look away, but the images follow me, blinking in the corner of my vision, always watching, always changing. I feel a tug at my chest. I know I need to keep moving, but something in the room calls to me. My hand brushes the surface of the desk, and a chill runs down my spine. There's a stack of papers at the edge of the table, each one covered in that same frantic handwriting I saw earlier, the ink so dark it looks like it was written in blood. I try to read, but the words swim before my eyes, twisting into shapes that make no sense. I can hear the whispers again, soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent. They echo in my mind, the same voice that haunted me before, the one that I thought was gone. I push the papers away and stumble backward, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of the room. But the door won't open. The walls seem to close in, pressing me toward the center of the room. The whispering intensifies, and I hear a low growl, like the house itself is angry at my intrusion. The next room I find is a dining hall, and it is worse. The table is set for 3. The plates gleam in the dim light, pristine and untouched. My plate is filled with something that pulses, something raw. I can smell it, something rancid, like decay mixed with the tang of iron. I swallow, forcing back the bile rising in my throat. The air is thick with the smell, and it clings to my skin, seeping into my lungs. I can't stop looking at the plate. The food moves, shifting ever so slightly, as if it's alive, breathing, waiting. The shadows in the room stretch unnaturally long, reaching toward me with fingers that are too thin, too elongated. The wife stands across from me, unmoving. Her eyes never leave me, watching with a hunger I cannot comprehend. I want to scream, to shout at her, but my voice won't come. The words are trapped inside me, suffocated by the heavy air that clings to the room. I try to speak to her. I beg for answers, for some way out of this nightmare. But my words crumble into dust as soon as they leave my lips. She doesn't answer. She never does. She just watches. The silence is unbearable, thick and oppressive. The clock strikes 11. An hour until midnight. An hour until, what? The walls shudder, groaning like a living thing. The chandelier above swings violently, though there is no breeze. The house is breathing, waiting. I can hear it, feel it in the pit of my stomach, like the slow, rhythmic beating of a heart. The house is alive, and it's waiting for something. Waiting for me. I don't know what, but I can feel it, like a pressure building inside me. I push open another door, my hand trembling as I grasp the knob. It leads to a bedroom, though it is not like any bedroom I have ever seen. The bed is covered in sheets of paper, stacked haphazardly, like a grotesque shrine to something long dead. And on the sheets, frantic handwriting. My handwriting. But I have never written these words before. The sentences swirl in maddening loops, telling of a deal, a promise. A sacrifice. I don't understand. I can't understand. I hear his voice behind me, soft at first, a murmur in the shadows. His words are indecipherable, but I know what they are. They are things he used to say, things we whispered in the dark when I thought no one else could hear. But now they sound different. They sound like a curse. Like something was taken that can never be returned. He is not supposed to be here. But then I remember, he isn't. Not anymore. He can't be. He died. I saw it. But his voice, his presence, it feels like a shadow creeping along the edges of my mind. I turn, but there is no one. Just the silence. Just the wife, standing in the doorway, watching me. The walls groan again. The house is shifting, moving, alive with the hunger of something ancient, something waiting. The wife steps inside, her movement smooth and deliberate. Her eyes are fixed on me, unblinking. I back away, my feet stumbling over the papers, my heart hammering in my chest. The room is shrinking, the walls closing in, tightening around me. There is nowhere to go. No way out. She raises a hand, slow and deliberate, pointing to the papers strewn across the bed. My hands shake as I lift one, trembling fingers brushing the ink. The words writhe beneath my touch, darkening as though the page itself is absorbing the fear from my skin. I pull the paper closer, but the letters blur, shifting in and out of focus. It's my handwriting, but the words are wrong. They are twisted. Unholy. The ink drips. The words slither, rearranging themselves before my eyes, twisting and coiling into shapes that make no sense. My name is signed at the bottom, a signature I do not remember making. The deal is sealed. The promise has been fulfilled. A contract, a bond, something has bound me to this place. To her. To the house. The clock strikes midnight. The air turns thick and oppressive, the very atmosphere vibrating with the pulse of something ancient and malevolent. The house is alive, and it has been waiting for this moment. For me. The wife smiles, but it is not a smile of satisfaction. It is a smile of victory, of someone who has won something more than just a game. It is a smile that comes from the deepest corners of the soul, a smile that has tasted the decay of time. You should have never come back. Her voice is a rasp, like dry paper crumbling under the weight of time. He's mine now. And you. Her smile widens, revealing teeth that are not teeth, but shards of glass, broken and jagged. You belong to the house. The walls begin to bleed. The floor cracks open, revealing the darkness beneath, a void that seems to swallow the light. The air grows colder, biting at my skin, pulling at my very soul. The whispers grow louder, deafening, filling my mind with the echo of 1,000 voices, a chorus of despair. I reach for the door, my hand shaking as I turn the knob, but it doesn't open. The walls constrict, suffocating, forcing me back into the room. There is no escape. There is no way out. "Welcome home," she whispers. "We've been waiting for you." And in that moment, I understand. I was never meant to leave. I was never meant to walk away. I was never meant to escape. The house has claimed me. And now, I am its secret. I am its prisoner. Forever. I try to scream, but the sound doesn't escape my throat. The house is too loud, the whispers drowning out all other noise. It hums with life, with hunger, and I feel it wrapping around me, tightening like a noose. The walls pulse in time with the slow, steady beat of a heart, an ancient, broken heart that has never stopped beating. Her smile lingers, wide and hollow. "We've been waiting for you," she repeats, and the words are a poison in my veins, slow and seeping, filling me with the cold knowledge that there is no escape. I was never meant to escape. The room shifts again, the walls bending inward, folding like paper into themselves. I'm being swallowed, pulled into the very fabric of the house. The edges of the room blur, and I feel my body tremble as something cold and unforgiving wraps around me. It's not just the house that moves. It's everything. The air, the shadows, the light, all of it converges, and I am the center, drawn into the eye of a storm that has no end. I feel the ink on my fingers, now slick and thick, as though the pages themselves are alive, writhing beneath my touch. The words twist like serpents, winding around me, binding me to this place in ways I cannot begin to comprehend. I try to pull my hand away, but it's stuck, bound to the paper, to the deal I never meant to make. The signature at the bottom, my name, my own blood, my soul, sealed away, a pact made in the deepest shadows of my desire, my fear. The wife steps closer, her form stretching, contorting, becoming something more monstrous with each step. Her skin rips and tears, revealing something far darker beneath, something that is not human. Her eyes glow, filled with a sickly, unnatural light. I want to look away, but I can't. I can't look away from her or the house, because they are one and the same. The house is her. She is the house. The clock, somehow still ticking, strikes again. The time doesn't matter anymore. Time here is a prison. Time is part of the game, part of the curse. And as the final chime echoes through the mansion, I understand the true nature of this place. This house has existed long before I came, and it will endure long after I am gone. The walls remember everything. The house remembers everything. And I have become part of it. I hear his voice again, faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. But this time it's different. It's not just a memory. It's real. His voice echoes in the very foundation of the house, a part of it now. He is here, but not in the way I remember. He is no longer human. He is something else, something that belongs to the house, just like I do now. I told you, his voice rumbles from the depths of the walls, from the shadows, you can never escape her. You never could. And I realize then, as the wife steps closer, as the walls close in around me, that he was right. The mansion has claimed me. It has claimed us both. We are no longer separate, no longer distinct. We are the same now, bound to the house, bound to its eternal hunger. The mansion is not just a building. It is a living thing, a twisted, ever-changing entity that consumes and devours, its hunger insatiable. The wife takes my hand, her touch cold and unyielding, and leads me into the darkness. The house breathes around me, filling my lungs with its fetid air, wrapping its tendrils around my soul. And in the distance, I hear the soft, mournful chime of the clock, midnight once more. The house has claimed its new secret. It is me. It always has been. And as I am pulled deeper into the mansion's heart, I know the truth. There is no escaping the house. There never was. I am home now. And it will never let me leave.